Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. We're continuing our Big 12 football predictions today, and our next team is coming off their second straight bowl win, and with 13 starters, could be a potential dark horse in the Big 12. They are the Kansas State Wildcats. Last year was a solid year for the Wildcats, going 8-5, including that bowl win over UCLA, but it could have been a lot better. The Wildcats lost 4 games by just 1 possession. They lost to Vanderbilt by 7, 6 to Texas in double overtime, 7 to Oklahoma, and 5 to West Virginia. So they could have easily had an 11-win season, which would have obviously put them in the Big 12 championship game. But an 8-5 record, very respectable for Bill Snyder and this Wildcat squad. They are looking to improve on that record with tons of talent returning this year, but unfortunately a very difficult schedule. They return 8 returning starters on the offensive side of the ball, and the quarterback, it's a kind of an interesting position right now. It's either going to be Alex Delton or Skylar Thompson. I personally believe that it will be Alex Delton. I think he's going to be the one that's going to put the Wildcats in the best position to win the games, especially the close ones. You know, he came in during that bowl game over UCLA and got them to victory there. But Skylar Thompson, of course, showing signs of brilliance before as well. But I think my money would be on Delton to be the starting quarterback. Running back is going to be Alex Barnes, who put over 800 yards on the ground last year, so a very solid running back there. And that's huge for him because they return all 5 of their offensive linemen, so huge for whoever's at quarterback, and then also Alex Barnes because he's going to have a solid line to run behind there. And then Isaiah Zuber, who was the number 2 wide receiver for the Wildcats last season, he returns, so going to be one of the favorite targets for whoever is at quarterback. This is a very sneaky good Kansas State offense that could surprise a lot of people this season. They put up some big numbers last year, could put up some even bigger ones this season. On defense, I am very, very excited about this Kansas State secondary. They only returned 5 starters on the entire defense, but 3 of them are in the secondary with Duke Shelley, Denzel Goolsby, and Kendall Adams. The 3 of those players combining for 7 interceptions last year and could be very, very dangerous for some of the solid quarterbacks in this Big 12. We have some solid quarterbacks here that are going to be very pass-happy offenses, and so going up against Kansas State with that strong secondary is not going to be a lot of fun for these quarterbacks. They also have Trey Deshawn and Reggie Walker leading that defensive line for the Wildcats as well, so a very dominant force there. So despite only returning 5 starters, plenty of talent on this Kansas State defense that could make them a surprise in this Big 12. But we'll jump into the schedule here, and I mentioned it's very, very difficult this season, despite having so much talent. They'll obviously open up the year with a win over South Dakota. Not worried about that. And then a very fun SEC versus Big 12 matchup here just in Week 2. Mississippi State making the road trip to Kansas State. But over the past 5 years, Kansas State is just 1-3 versus SEC teams. That one win coming in their bowl game just 2 years ago when they beat Texas A&M. But just 1-3, and they're going up against a Mississippi State team that, yes, will be led with a new head coach under Joe Moorhead, but returns 17 starters, including Nick Fitzgerald at quarterback, Eris Williams at the running back position, and then you've got a solid defensive line that's not getting a lot of credit, led by Montez Sweat there. So I believe it's 9 on offense for Mississippi State and 8 on defense for the Bulldogs there. Yes, it is at Kansas State. I think you could see a lot of offense in this game, a lot of points being scored, a lot of yards put up in this game. Should be a lot of fun to watch, but in the end, despite Kansas State having home field advantage, I think it's going to come down to defense, and I think Mississippi State owns the edge on the defensive side of the ball. Yes, I just praised Kansas State and their secondary and some solid defensive line playmakers, but I think Mississippi State has too much experience on that side of the ball, and I think they're going to come in and get a huge win over a very solid Power 5 opponent, so I'm going to give Kansas State a loss there. I'm going to give them a win, of course, over Texas San Antonio, so a 2-1 record entering Big 12 play, and they start off on the road against West Virginia. This is not the West Virginia team we have seen in years past. This is a West Virginia team that I have praised pretty much since the season ended last year. As long as they can keep Will Grier healthy at quarterback, they're going to be just fine. I really do believe could contend for the Big 12 championship. They got Will Grier at the quarterback position. They've got Gary Jennings and David Sills leading maybe one of the better wide receiving corps in the entire nation. Then a defense that once again will be somewhat sneaky good. The SA allowed 31.5 points per game last year, but Dana Holgorsen has slowly built this team up on the defensive side of the ball and should be a lot better. I'm going to give Kansas State a loss here to the Mountaineers. I think this offense is just going to be too much for this Kansas State defense. The defense for Kansas State, that secondary, might do a pretty good job of limiting Will Grier in the passing game, shutting him down a little bit, but I think he's one of the better quarterbacks in the nation. I think he will make the plays when he has to. They'll make adjustments if they have to. It is on the road. I'm going to give Kansas State a loss to the Mountaineers, a very, very solid Mountaineers team. But I think they bounce back at 2-2 and get a huge win over Texas at home. And I've repeatedly said that this is a very different Texas team, one that I really do think will compete with Oklahoma, could make the Big 12 championship game. But you got to keep in mind, last year on the road, Kansas State lost to Texas in double overtime. And yes, that was a different Texas team. This is a different Kansas State team. Texas not as good as they were, not as good as they're going to be this year as they were last year. I'll say that. So, this is a Texas team that I'm high on. They're coming on the road to Kansas State. I know they're going to be hyped for this game. They don't want to see themselves go below 500. And I think this offense pops Texas in the mouth early. I think they catch them a little off guard. I believe that Oklahoma is right after this game here for Texas. So maybe Texas is overlooking Kansas State a little bit in preparation for Oklahoma. I think Kansas State gets a huge win over the Longhorns in this one to stay at 3-2. And I think they've improved to 4-2 with a win over Baylor, a Baylor team that, yes, is going to improve this year after going 1-11 last year, Matt Rule's inaugural year. But they returned 17 starters, and I do think they're going to improve. I love Charlie Brewer at the quarterback position, but there's just not going to be enough, even though it is at home, to defeat a Kansas State team who has a lot of consistency, obviously, at the head coaching position in Bill Snyder. Matt Rule is entering year 2. I think has the edge at the quarterback and running back positions. So despite Baylor returning 9 offensive starters, Kansas State returns 8. Not a huge difference there, and I think Kansas State has much more experience. This is still a young Baylor team that's still learning their ways under Matt Rule's offense, under his leadership. I think Kansas State has enough to go on the road and get a win over Baylor somewhat comfortably, I should add there. Then Oklahoma State back at home as well. If you remember, last year was the first time since 1999 that Kansas State had won in Stillwater, had gone on the road and beaten Oklahoma State. I think they get another win over the Cowboys this year. Oklahoma State was number 10 in the country last year when Kansas State kind of shocked the entire college football world. They were number 10 at the time, Oklahoma State was. And that loss for Oklahoma State pretty much took away any hopes that they had at a Big 12 championship run, a college football playoff berth. I mean, they're number 10. They win that. They close out the year strong. Maybe they sneak into the college football playoff. Maybe they sneak into the Big 12 championship game. At Kansas State wanted nothing of that. I think they get a win over an Oklahoma State team that will be a little depleted on the offensive side of the ball after losing Mason Rudolph, after losing James Washington. Yes, they returned Justice Hill, a very strong running back there. But they do have some questions at the quarterback position. I think with it being at home, they get a win over the Cowboys. They've won 3 straight here. Right now, they are 5-2 going into the bye week. A still very, very strong record, but you look at the schedule that Kansas State has to do after their bye week. At Oklahoma, at TCU, and at Iowa State, a very difficult team to play at, and a very difficult team this year, period. And then Texas Tech at home, a sneaky good team as well. We'll start with Oklahoma. Last year, with a better Oklahoma team than they're going to have this year, Baker Mayfield, a very potent offense, Kansas State only lost by 7 to the Sooners. But that was at Kansas State. This is a different Oklahoma team this year. This is a different Kansas State team this year. With it being at Oklahoma, I said Oklahoma State earlier, that was incorrect. With it being at Oklahoma, despite coming off a bye week and being rested, I'm going to give them a loss to the Sooners. It's a Lincoln Riley-led team that's going to still be extremely dangerous despite losing Mayfield, obviously their star. They still have Rodney Anderson at the running back position who rushed for over 1,100 yards last year. Still some solid wide receivers. And I believe Kyler Murray, who will be the quarterback for the Sooners, a solid dual-threat quarterback that's going to be a pretty difficult task for the Kansas State defense to handle. I'm going to give them a loss to the Sooners here. I know they're going to be hungry to get a win over Oklahoma, especially after coming so close last year. I just think there's still a little bit of ways from defeating Oklahoma there. On the road at TCU, so back-to-back road games against back-to-back super solid teams in the Big 12. TCU, like Oklahoma, replacing their star quarterback, this time in Kenny Hill, but still plenty of offensive talent, though. But despite all that, TCU's strength this year is going to be the defense. And they're going to be a sneaky good defense, maybe one of the better in the entire Big 12. And with that being the case, having home field advantage and having a strong defense to go up against a strong Kansas State offense, I think the signs are pointing towards a Horned Frogs win, because if they can shut down this Kansas State offense, I think by this point, Gary Patterson is going to have this TCU offense clicking enough that they're going to be able to put up some points against Kansas State and get a win. So it's on the road. They're going up against this tough defense. It's in November. If TCU's in contention for the Big 12 championship game, they're going to start hitting their stride, trying to finish strong. And I think Kansas State goes on the road and loses to the Horned Frogs. Now, they do get a win over Kansas, of course. They've won 10 straight against the Jayhawks. Going to make it 11. Maybe they'll improve a little bit this year, but just not enough to compete against many teams in the Big 12, I should say. They're 3-33 under David Beatty. I don't expect a huge improvement this season. And I do think they get a win over Texas Tech. I think at home, they get a win over a Texas Tech team that, as I've repeatedly said, will be fighting to keep Cliff Kingsbury, with a job with the Red Raiders in Lubbock. But with it being at home for the Wildcats, I think they're able to get the job done here. Texas Tech will have a very improved defense with 10 returning starters there, and always potent offense under Cliff Kingsbury with 6 returning starters there. But I think Kansas State's going to have enough coming off a win over a rival and too much of a potent offense for Texas Tech to handle in this game. I think Kansas State gets a huge win at home, but closes out the year, unfortunately for them, with a loss to Iowa State. Now, I know a lot of people will think that's kind of crazy, but think about this last year. Last year's game was actually one of the better games, I think, maybe in the entire Big 12 last year. Kansas State winning 20-19 with a touchdown as time expired. So a heartbreaking loss for Iowa State, who kind of struggled towards the end of last season. This time on the road against the Cyclones, one of the more difficult places to play in the Big 12. They're out for revenge after losing in such heartbreaking fashion last year in the season finale. And I think Iowa State has enough talent this year to get a win over a solid Wildcats team. The Cyclones, not a team anybody can sleep on. They beat Oklahoma last year. They beat TCU last year. They went 8-5 last year. And they are certainly, once again, a threat in the Big 12. And I think they close the year with a win over the Wildcats, which is going to give Kansas State a 7-5 record on the year, which is exactly what they had last year before their victory over UCLA in their bowl game to finish 8-5. And I know some people will see that as a disappointment. Some people will say with the talent that Kansas State returns this year is a disappointment. But you have to look at the schedule and the talent that they have to go up against in the Big 12. You're facing a West Virginia team that I think could have one of the most potent offenses in the entire nation. You're going up against Oklahoma and TCU, who met in the Big 12 championship game last year. And yes, lose some star key players on both sides of the ball for Oklahoma and TCU, but will still be dominant. So both of them also on the road. So they're facing maybe the top 3 teams or 3 of the top teams in the Big 12 all on the road. You've got Iowa State, who's on the road, who's out for revenge and almost beat Kansas State last year. And then Mississippi State in the SEC, who returned 17 starters and will be strong on both sides of the ball, and who I really think could contend for potentially second place in the very difficult SEC West. So I think all of these 5 losses for the Wildcats are justified, are reasonable to predict. Maybe they pull off an upset here or two. They certainly have the team to do it, to pull off an upset. Maybe they get that win over Mississippi State. Maybe they go on the road and beat a TCU or an Iowa State or West Virginia. I don't think they'll beat Oklahoma, but you never know. They have the talent to pull off some upsets and get to 8 wins or 9 wins in the regular season. But I think 7-5 is reasonable and somewhat justified going into this 2018 season. But nonetheless, I cannot wait to see the job that Bill Snyder does with this Wildcats team because I know they have a lot of talent, and I cannot wait to see how they fare in a very difficult Big 12 this season. So as always, please go check us out on Twitter at Gridiron Expert, on Instagram at The Gridiron Expert, and always here on YouTube. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time on The Gridiron Expert.